They laughed at the base nurse until a Special Forces Apache landed looking for her. The desert wind carried sand across the small military outpost like nature itself was trying to bury everything human beings had built there. Forward Operating Base Kestrel sat in one of the most remote corners of Afghanistan, a collection of concrete barriers, temporary buildings, and tired soldiers who had long ago stopped counting the days until they could go home. It was the kind of place the military sent people when it did not know what else to do with them, or when it wanted to forget they existed at all. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had been at FOB Kestrel for 11 months, and, in that time she had learned that being forgotten was sometimes worse than being hated. She was a nurse, assigned to a medical station that saw more cases of dehydration and boredom than actual combat injuries. The base was too small and too remote to see real action, which meant the soldiers stationed there had plenty of time to develop opinions about everyone around them. Sarah was 32 years old, with brown hair she kept tied back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen enough suffering to make her look older than her years. She had joined the Army Nurse Corps right out of nursing school, driven by a desire to serve that she could never quite explain to her civilian friends back home in Minnesota. Her father had been a farmer, her mother a schoolteacher, and neither of them understood why their daughter would choose to spend her life in war zones instead of a comfortable hospital in Minneapolis. But Sarah had always felt called to something more. She believed in helping people at their worst moments, when everything else had fallen apart and hope seemed impossible. She had served in Iraq, in field hospitals where the wounded came in waves and the blood never seemed to stop flowing. She had held the hands of dying soldiers and written letters to their families. She had saved lives that should have been lost and lost lives that should have been saved. War had taught her that medicine was as much about the soul as it was about the body. None of that mattered at FOB Kestrel. Here, she was just the nurse in the small medical building, the woman who handed out aspirin and treated minor cuts. The combat soldiers looked past her like she was furniture, and the support staff avoided her because associating with someone so low in the unofficial hierarchy could hurt their own standing. The morning everything began to change started like every other morning at the base. Sarah woke at 5:30, put on her uniform, and walked the 300 meters from her quarters to the medical station. The sky was still dark, with only a thin line of orange on the eastern horizon promising another brutally hot day. She could hear the generators humming and smell the diesel fuel that seemed to permeate everything at the base. The medical station was a converted shipping container that had been expanded with plywood walls and a corrugated metal roof. It had 2 examination rooms, a small pharmacy closet, and a waiting area with plastic chairs that were always either too hot or too cold depending on the season. Sarah had tried to make it feel more welcoming by putting up posters about hand hygiene and staying hydrated, but the effect was more depressing than comforting. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, already knowing how her day would unfold. A few soldiers would come in complaining of headaches or stomach problems. Someone would need a prescription refilled. Maybe there would be a twisted ankle from the makeshift basketball court or a burn from the kitchen. Nothing that would challenge her skills. Nothing that would remind her why she had become a nurse in the first place. By 9 in the morning, Sarah had seen 3 patients and was working on inventory reports when she heard voices outside her window. Male voices, loud and carrying the particular tone that men used when they wanted to be overheard. "Did you see her trying to talk to Captain Rodriguez yesterday?" one voice said. "Like she actually thought he would give her the time of day." Another voice laughed. "The base nurse thinking she matters. That is classic. Someone should tell her this is not Grey's Anatomy. She probably joined the army because she could not cut it in a real hospital," a third voice added. "Now she is stuck out here giving flu shots to people who would rather be anywhere else." Sarah kept her eyes on her paperwork, but her hand had stopped moving. She knew they were talking about her. They were always talking about her, or about someone like her. The base was small enough that gossip was the primary form of entertainment, and she had become a popular target because she refused to react. "I heard she requested a transfer 3 times, the first voice continued. 3 times they told her no. Even the army does not want her somewhere else." This was not true. Sarah had never requested a transfer. She had come to FOB Kestrel voluntarily, replacing a medic who had suffered a breakdown after his 3rd deployment. She had chosen this assignment because someone needed to be here, and she had nothing keeping her anywhere else. No husband waiting at home, no children who needed their mother. Her parents had passed away within 6 months of each other 2 years ago, and her sister had made it clear that Sarah's lifestyle made it difficult to maintain a close relationship. But the truth did not matter to the soldiers outside her window. They had decided who she was, and no amount of reality would change their minds. Sarah finished her inventory report and filed it away. She checked the expiration dates on the medications in her closet. She restocked the gauze and bandages in the examination rooms. She did everything she could to stay busy, to avoid thinking about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. At noon, she walked to the mess hall for lunch. The building was crowded with soldiers eating quickly before returning to whatever duties filled their days. Sarah got her tray of food and looked for a place to sit. Every table seemed full, or at least full of people who made it clear through their body language that she was not welcome to join them. She found a seat at the end of a table occupied by 3 supply clerks who were too absorbed in their conversation to notice her. She ate her meal in silence, listening to fragments of their discussion about a shipment that had gone missing and a sergeant who was about to get in serious trouble for it. A shadow fell across her tray, and Sarah looked up to see Sergeant First Class Derek Morrison standing over her. Morrison was one of the senior enlisted soldiers at the base, a man who had been in the army for 20 years and had never let anyone forget it. He was built like a fire hydrant, short and wide, with a face that seemed permanently arranged in an expression of contempt. "Mitchell," he said, not bothering with her rank. "The CO wants to see you." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Being summoned by the commanding officer was rarely good news. "Did he say what about?" Morrison shrugged. "Above my pay grade. Just get over there." She abandoned her half-eaten lunch and walked across the base to the command building. Colonel James Whitmore ran FOB Kestrel with the enthusiasm of a man serving out his final years before retirement. He was competent but uninspired, more interested in maintaining the status quo than accomplishing anything meaningful. Sarah had spoken to him perhaps a dozen times in her 11 months at the base, always about administrative matters that required his signature. His office was a cramped room filled with maps and filing cabinets. When Sarah knocked and entered, she found him sitting behind his desk with a folder open in front of him. He looked tired, which was his default expression, but there was something else in his eyes today. Something that might have been concern. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat." Sarah sat down and waited. She had learned long ago that officers preferred to set the pace of conversations, and interrupting them only made things worse. Colonel Whitmore studied her for a moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "How long have you been at this base, Lieutenant?" 11 months, sir." "And, in that time, have you ever treated any of the local population?" The question surprised her. "No, sir. We are not authorized to provide medical care to Afghan nationals. Our resources are strictly for military personnel." "I am aware of the regulations," Whitmore said. "I am asking if you have ever violated them." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "No, sir. I have not." The colonel nodded slowly. "There is a village about 15 kilometers from here. Nasirabad. Have you heard of it?" "Only in passing, sir. Some of the patrols mention it." "The village has a problem. A medical problem. Their only doctor died 6 months ago, and they have not been able to find a replacement. The nearest hospital is 4 hours away on roads that are not safe to travel. People are dying from conditions that could be treated with basic medical care." Sarah did not understand where this conversation was going. "That is terrible, sir, but I am not sure what it has to do with me." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "The village elders have made a request. They have asked if we would be willing to send someone to help them. A medical professional who could spend a few hours each week treating their sick and injured. Sir, that would require authorization from much higher up the chain of command. The rules about engaging with local populations are very strict." "I am aware of that too," Whitmore said. I am also aware that those rules were written by people sitting in air-conditioned offices who have never seen a child die from a preventable infection." Sarah stared at the colonel. In 11 months, this was the most he had ever said to her, and it was the most human she had ever seen him. "What exactly are you asking me to do, sir?" Whitmore closed the folder on his desk. "I am not asking you to do anything, Lieutenant. I am telling you that every Saturday morning, there is a patrol that passes near Nasirabad. If someone happened to be on that patrol, and if that someone happened to have medical supplies in their pack, and if that someone happened to stop in the village for an hour or two, I would not know anything about it. My paperwork would show that everything was done by the book." Sarah understood. The colonel was giving her permission to break the rules, while also giving himself deniability if anything went wrong. It was the kind of arrangement that could end her career if it blew up, but it was also an opportunity to actually help people. "Why me, sir?" she asked. "Why are you offering this to me?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "Because I have watched you for 11 months, Mitchell. I have seen how the others treat you. I have heard what they say about you when they think no one important is listening. And I have noticed that you never complain, never cause problems, never ask for anything. You just do your job and take whatever they throw at you." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "My wife is a nurse. Has been for 30 years. I have seen how people treat nurses, especially women nurses in the military. I have seen my wife come home crying because some doctor decided she was an easy target for his bad day. I know what it is like to work in a profession where everyone takes you for granted until they need you." Sarah did not know what to say. She had never expected empathy from the colonel, had never expected empathy from anyone at FOB Kestrel. "The village needs help," Whitmore continued. "You need a purpose." It seemed like a good match. 3 days later, Sarah found herself riding in the back of a Humvee as it bounced along a rutted dirt road toward Nasirabad. She had packed a bag with basic medical supplies, nothing that would be missed from the base inventory, things she had collected over time without any specific plan. Bandages, antibiotics, pain medication, rehydration salts. The tools of mercy in a place where mercy was rare. The patrol leader was a young sergeant named Thompson who clearly thought this whole thing was a waste of time. He had been ordered to take a detour to the village and wait there for 90 minutes while the lieutenant did whatever it was she was going to do. He had not asked questions, but his attitude made his feelings clear. Nasirabad appeared on the horizon as a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by patches of struggling crops. It looked like 1,000 other villages Sarah had seen from a distance, places that blurred together in the geography of war. But, as the convoy drew closer, she could see people emerging from their homes to watch. Children with dirty faces. Women in colorful headscarves. Old men leaning on walking sticks. The Humvee stopped at the edge of the village, and Sarah climbed out with her bag. A man approached her, moving slowly because of a pronounced limp. He was perhaps 50 years old, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much suffering. "You are the American doctor?" he asked in accented but clear English. "I am a nurse," Sarah said. "But I am here to help if I can." The man nodded. "I am Hamid. I speak English because I taught school before the wars. Now I help the elders when they need to talk to outsiders." He paused, studying her face. "They said an American might come. I did not believe it." "Why not?" Hamid smiled sadly. "Because Americans come with guns and promises. They do not come with medicine and hope." "Not anymore." He led her through the village to a building that had once been a shop of some kind. The shelves were empty now, and the space had been cleared to accommodate people waiting for help. Sarah stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by what she saw. There were at least 40 people packed into the small room, sitting on the floor or leaning against the walls. Mothers held crying babies. Elderly men coughed into their hands. Children with skin infections and swollen bellies looked at her with huge eyes that held no expectation, only curiosity about this stranger in their midst. "This is everyone who needs help?" Sarah asked. Hamid shook his head. This is everyone who could come. There are more who are too sick to leave their beds. There are more who are too proud to ask for help from outsiders. There are more who have given up. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the room. She had 90 minutes. She had a bag of basic supplies. She had skills that suddenly felt completely inadequate for the task in front of her. But she also had something she had not felt in a very long time. She had purpose. She sat up in a corner of the room, using an overturned crate as an examination table. Hamid stayed by her side, translating when necessary, explaining cultural sensitivities, helping her navigate the invisible rules that governed this community. Her first patient was a baby with a high fever and a rash that spread across her chest. The mother looked terrified, clutching the child as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Sarah examined the baby gently, checking her vital signs with the limited equipment she had brought. "It is a bacterial infection," she told Hamid. "Very treatable with antibiotics. But she needs to take them for 10 days, the full course, or the infection will come back stronger." Hamid translated, and the mother's face transformed from fear to something approaching hope. She had probably expected to be told her daughter was dying. She had probably already started grieving. Sarah gave her the antibiotics and explained the dosing through Hamid. She also gave her packets of rehydration salts to help with the fever. It was basic medicine, the kind of care that would be routine in any hospital back home. But here, it might save a life. The next patient was an old man with a wound on his leg that had become infected. It was ugly, filled with pus, and probably should have been treated weeks ago. Sarah cleaned it as best she could, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped it in clean bandages. She told him to keep it dry and come back next week so she could check on it. "Next week?" Hamid translated the man's surprised response. "You will come back?" Sarah had not actually planned that far ahead. She had been thinking of this as a one-time thing, a single act of mercy to ease her conscience. But, looking at the room full of people still waiting, she knew one visit would not be enough. "Yes," she said. "I will come back." The 90 minutes passed in a blur of examinations and treatments. She saw children with parasites and women with chronic pain. She saw injuries from farming accidents and illnesses that should have been cured years ago. She gave out everything in her bag and still had to turn people away, promising them she would return with more supplies. When Sergeant Thompson finally came to collect her, his expression had changed. He had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her work, and something had shifted in his eyes. "Lieutenant," he said, and there was respect in his voice now that had not been there before. "It is time to go." Sarah said goodbye to Hamid and the village elders who had gathered to thank her. The gratitude in their faces was almost painful to witness. They had so little, and she had given them so little, but it meant everything to them. On the ride back to base, Thompson cleared his throat. "That was something else, ma'am. What you did back there." "It was just basic medical care," Sarah said. "Nothing special." "Maybe. But I have been on 3 deployments, and I have never seen anyone do what you just did. Most of us just drive through these villages and try not to make eye contact. You actually helped them." Sarah did not know how to respond. She was not used to compliments, especially not from combat soldiers who usually looked right through her. Back at FOB Kestrel, she returned to her medical station and resumed her normal duties. She handed out aspirin and treated minor cuts. She listened to the voices outside her window making jokes about her. She ate her meals alone and went to sleep in her empty quarters. But now there was something different. Now there was something waiting for her at the end of the week. A reason to keep going when everything else felt meaningless. She did not know that her Saturday visits to Nasirabad would eventually reach ears far beyond the dusty roads of Afghanistan. She did not know that her small acts of mercy would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. She did not know that somewhere, in the shadows where special operations warriors plan missions that never made the news, someone was starting to pay attention to the base nurse that everyone else had written off. All she knew was that for the first time in 11 months, she felt like a nurse again, And that was enough. The weeks began to pass in a new rhythm. Sarah lived for Saturdays, for those precious hours when she could actually make a difference. She started keeping a notebook, tracking the patients she saw, noting their conditions and treatments so she could follow up on her next visit. She learned to pack her bag more efficiently, prioritizing the supplies that would help the most people. She learned a few phrases in Dari, enough to put patients at ease before Hamid stepped in to translate. The changes in Nasirabad were gradual but real. The baby with the infection recovered completely, and her mother brought her to show Sarah on a subsequent visit, beaming with pride. The old man's leg wound healed, leaving only a scar where there had been spreading rot. Word spread to neighboring villages, and soon people were traveling hours just to see the American nurse who came every Saturday. Sarah's bag of supplies grew inadequate for the demand, so she started getting creative. She wrote letters to medical supply companies back in the United States, explaining her situation and asking for donations. She reached out to veteran organizations and church groups. She contacted nursing schools and asked if they had expired supplies they were planning to discard. Slowly, packages started arriving at FOB Kestrel, boxes of bandages and medications that she stored in her quarters and rationed carefully. Colonel Whitmore never asked where the supplies were coming from. He maintained his careful fiction of ignorance, signing off on Sarah's Saturday patrol accompaniments without comment. The other soldiers at the base noticed the packages arriving but assumed they were personal items, care packages from a family that did not exist. 3 months into her Saturday visits, Sarah had a breakthrough that would prove crucial to everything that followed. She was treating a young boy whose arm had been badly broken and had healed crooked because there had been no one to set it properly. The break was weeks old, and there was nothing Sarah could do with her limited resources. "He will never use the arm right," she told Hamid, frustrated by her limitations. "If I had been here when it happened, I could have set it correctly. But now the bones have fused wrong." Hamid nodded sadly. "There are many like him. Many injuries that needed immediate help and got none. We have learned to accept what cannot be changed." But Sarah could not accept it. That night, back at the base, she lay awake thinking about all the people she could not help because she only came once a week. The emergencies that happened on Monday or Thursday. The accidents that required immediate care. The illnesses that turned deadly because they had to wait too long for treatment. She needed to do more. She needed to be available when people needed her, not just when the patrol schedule allowed. The idea came to her in the gray hours before dawn, and it was so audacious that she almost dismissed it immediately. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the only solution. She would train the villagers to help themselves. Not full medical training, obviously. That would take years and resources she did not have. But basic first aid, wound care, the recognition of symptoms that required immediate attention. If she could teach even a few people in each village the fundamentals, they could handle minor problems and know when something was serious enough to seek outside help. Sarah approached Hamid with the idea on her next visit. The old teacher's eyes lit up in a way she had not seen before. "This is wise," he said. "Give a man a fish and he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. You want to teach us to fish?" "Something like that," Sarah agreed. "But I need students. People who are willing to learn and who have the respect of the community. People who can be trusted with medical knowledge." Hamid thought for a moment. "There are 3 women in the village who help when babies are born. They have some knowledge already, passed down from their mothers. They would be good students." "Only women?" "Men would not learn such things," Hamid explained. "In our culture, caring for the sick and injured is women's work. Men would lose respect if they were seen doing it." Sarah nodded, accepting the cultural reality. "Then, bring me the women. I will teach them everything I can." The following Saturday, Sarah met her first students. Fatima was the oldest, a grandmother who had delivered more than 50 babies over her decades as a midwife. Zara was in her 30s, the wife of a farmer, who had learned healing herbs from her mother. And Layla was barely 20, a widow whose husband had died in fighting between rival groups, leaving her with nothing but time and a desperate need for purpose. Sarah started with the basics. How to clean a wound to prevent infection. How to recognize the signs of dehydration and treat it. How to take a pulse and what different rates might mean. How to wrap a bandage so it stayed in place without cutting off circulation. The women were eager students, absorbing information like the dry earth absorbed rain. They asked questions constantly, wanting to understand not just what to do but why. Sarah found herself enjoying the teaching as much as the treating, discovering a talent for explaining complex concepts in simple terms. Within a month, her students were handling minor cases on their own. They reported back to her each Saturday, describing what they had done and asking for feedback. Sarah corrected their mistakes gently and praised their successes generously. She watched them grow in confidence and skill, becoming the healthcare providers their community desperately needed. Word of the training spread to other villages. Elders from Nasirabad's neighbors started appearing on Saturdays, asking if their women could learn too. Sarah's 90-minute visits stretched to 3 hours, then 4, as she tried to accommodate everyone who wanted her help. Colonel Whitmore continued to look the other way, though Sarah suspected he knew exactly how much time she was actually spending in the villages. He never said anything, just kept signing the patrol authorizations without comment. The other soldiers at FOB Kestrel remained oblivious to what Sarah was doing. They still made jokes about the useless base nurse, still avoided sitting near her at meals, still treated her like she was invisible. None of them had any idea that she had become something far more than the person they thought they knew. But someone else did know. Someone far away, in a classified facility where intelligence analysts pieced together information from 1,000 different sources. Someone who had started to notice unusual patterns in the reports from remote Afghan villages. Someone who was asking questions about a military nurse who seemed to be doing impossible things with minimal resources. The machinery of fate was beginning to turn, though Sarah had no way of knowing it. Her small acts of mercy were creating ripples that would eventually become waves that would crash into her carefully constructed anonymity and change everything she thought she knew about her place in the world. But that was still months away. For now, she was simply a nurse doing what nurses do, caring for the sick and teaching others to do the same. For now, she was content with the purpose she had found and the difference she was making. For now, she had no idea that her life was about to be turned upside down by the arrival of warriors she had never met and a mission she could not imagine. The rainy season came to Afghanistan with unusual ferocity that year, turning the dusty roads into rivers of mud and making travel between villages nearly impossible. Sarah watched the weather patterns with growing anxiety, knowing that her Saturday visits would become harder and harder to maintain as conditions worsened. The Humvees that carried the patrols were not designed for flooded roads, and more than once they had been forced to turn back when the route to Nasirabad became impassable. But the need in the villages did not pause for bad weather. If anything, it intensified. The cold and wet brought respiratory infections that spread through crowded homes like fire through dry brush. Children who were already malnourished became more vulnerable to every illness that found them. The elderly, many of whom had chronic conditions that Sarah had been managing with regular medication, began to decline when their supplies ran out. Sarah started planning ahead, stocking extra medications with her students so they could continue treatments even when she could not be there in person. She wrote out detailed instructions for Fatima, Zara, and Layla, anticipating every scenario she could imagine. She trained them to recognize the warning signs that meant someone needed more help than they could provide, even though there was often nowhere to get that help. The limitations of her situation became painfully clear during a storm in late November. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight, and the roads had been closed since the previous afternoon. Sarah was in her medical station, listening to the water hammer against the metal roof, when Hamid's voice came crackling over the radio that the patrol sergeant had given him for emergencies. "American nurse, come quickly. A child is very sick. We do not know what to do." Sarah grabbed the radio. "Hamid, tell me what you see. What are the symptoms?" There was a pause, and then, Hamid's voice again, tight with fear. "The girl is 7 years old. She has been sick for 2 days.
High fever. She will not eat.
Now she is shaking and her skin is turning yellow.
Yellow skin. Liver involvement.
Combined with the fever and shaking, it could be any number of things, but several of the possibilities were very serious. Sarah's mind raced through the differential diagnoses, wishing she had more information.
Is she still conscious? Can she respond when you talk to her?
She opens her eyes but does not seem to see us. She is saying words that make no sense.
Delirium.
The child was deteriorating rapidly.
Without knowing the exact cause, Sarah could not tell Hamid what to do.
And, even if she could, the medications that might help were sitting in her bag at FOB Kestrel, useless. "I am coming," she said into the radio, even as she knew it was probably impossible. She ran through the rain to the command building and found Sergeant Thompson, who had become an unlikely ally over the past months. He had seen what Sarah did in the villages, and it had changed something in him. He no longer dismissed her as the useless base nurse. He had started treating her with the respect usually reserved for combat soldiers.
"I need to get to Nasirabad," Sarah said. "Now." Thompson looked out the window at the sheets of rain. "The roads are gone, ma'am.
"We tried to send a patrol out this morning and they got stuck twice before they gave up. A child is dying."
"I have to try."
Thompson studied her face for a long moment, seeing the desperation there. Then, he shook his head slowly.
"Even if you got there, you would be stuck for days. And if something happens to you out there, we have no way to help."
"I am sorry, Lieutenant.
I really am. But I cannot authorize it."
Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right.
Getting herself killed in a flood would not save anyone.
She returned to her medical station and picked up the radio again.
"Hamid, I cannot come. The roads are too dangerous. Tell me everything about the girl. Everything you can see and feel and smell.
I will try to help from here." For the next 3 hours, Sarah talked Hamid and Fatima through an examination they were never trained to do. She had them check the child's pulse, her breathing rate, the color of her gums and the whites of her eyes. She had them smell her breath and feel for swelling in her abdomen. Piece by piece, she gathered information from dozens of miles away, trying to form a picture of what was happening inside a body she could not touch. Her best guess was malaria, which was unusual in this region but not unheard of. If she was right, the child needed anti-malarial medications that Sarah did not have at the base. Without them, the girl would likely die within days. Sarah made a decision that could have ended her career. She called the military hospital at Kandahar, the nearest facility with comprehensive medical supplies, and told them she had a malaria case at FOB Kestrel. She described the symptoms exactly as Hamid had reported them, leaving out the minor detail that the patient was not at the base but in a village 15 kilometers away. The doctor on duty at Kandahar was skeptical but agreed to send the medications on the next helicopter that could fly in the weather. It arrived 6 hours later, a Black Hawk that had pushed through a brief gap in the storm to deliver supplies to several remote bases. Sarah met the helicopter on the landing pad, collected the anti-malarial drugs, and immediately began planning how to get them to Nasirabad. The storm was still too severe for ground vehicles, but she remembered something Thompson had mentioned about an old footpath that the locals sometimes used between villages. She found Sergeant Morrison, who despite his gruff exterior knew the terrain around the base better than anyone.
"There is a path to Nasirabad that does not follow the roads. Can someone guide me?"
Morrison looked at her like she had lost her mind. "That path goes through the mountains, Lieutenant. It is a 4-hour walk in good conditions.
In this weather, you would be lucky to make it in 8. And that is assuming you do not slip off a cliff in the dark."
"A child is dying." Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then, he sighed and reached for his radio. "I know a guy in the village who sometimes helps us with local intelligence.
Let me see if he can meet you halfway."
The contact turned out to be a young man named Tariq, who had worked as a translator for American forces before a leg injury ended his military career. He knew the mountain paths like he knew his own heartbeat, and he agreed to guide Sarah through the storm. They left at dusk, climbing into the hills behind FOB Kestrel as the rain continued to fall. Sarah carried her medical bag and the precious anti-malarial drugs wrapped in plastic to keep them dry. Tarek led the way with a flashlight, pointing out the treacherous spots where the path had washed away or where loose rocks made footing uncertain. The journey was the most difficult physical challenge of Sarah's life. The path was steep and slippery, winding through narrow passes where a single misstep could mean a fatal fall. Her boots filled with water within the first hour, and her uniform clung to her body like a second skin. Her muscles burned with effort, and her lungs screamed for air in the thin mountain atmosphere. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Somewhere ahead, a 7-year-old girl was dying because Sarah had been too far away to help her. Every step brought her closer to changing that. They reached Nasirabad just after midnight, more than 7 hours after they had left the base. The village was dark except for the faint glow of oil lamps in a few windows. Tarek led her to the home where the sick child lay, and Sarah pushed through the door to find Hamid, Fatima, and a family frozen in the paralysis of helpless grief. The girl was worse than Sarah had feared. Her skin had turned a deep yellow, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her pulse was weak and rapid, and she did not respond when Sarah called her name or touched her face. She was sliding into a coma, and, without immediate intervention, she would be dead by morning. Sarah worked through the night, administering the anti-malarial drugs and starting in 4 with fluids she had brought from the base. She monitored the child's vital signs every 15 minutes, adjusting her treatment based on the responses she observed. She talked to the girl constantly, telling her stories about Minnesota and snow and the farm where Sarah had grown up, hoping that some part of her could hear and would hold on to life. The parents watched in terrified silence, understanding that their daughter's fate was now in the hands of this American stranger who had appeared out of the storm like a figure from legend. The grandmother prayed in the corner, her lips moving in continuous supplication to God. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the gaps in the walls as the rain finally began to ease. And, with the dawn came the first signs that the girl was going to live. Her breathing deepened. Her pulse grew stronger. The yellow tinge in her skin began to fade, replaced by a more natural color that made Sarah want to weep with relief. By midday, the child was awake and asking for water. By evening, she was sitting up and eating small amounts of rice. By the following morning, she was complaining that she was bored and wanted to go outside and play. Sarah stayed in the village for 3 days, waiting for the roads to become passable again and making sure her patient continued to recover. During that time, word spread through the surrounding area about what she had done. The nurse who had walked through the storm to save a child became a story that people told around their fires at night. She became something more than a helpful foreigner. She became a symbol of hope in a place where hope was dangerously rare. When Sarah finally made it back to FOB Kestrel, she expected to face consequences for her unauthorized absence. 3 days was a long time to be missing from a military base, especially without official permission. But, when she reported to Colonel Whitmore, he simply looked at her with an expression she could not read. "I heard about what you did," he said. "The whole base heard. You walked through a storm to save an Afghan child." Sarah braced herself for the reprimand. "Sir, I know I violated multiple regulations. I understand if there need to be consequences." Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then, he shook his head slowly. "Lieutenant, I have been in the Army for 25 years. I have seen a lot of things that regulations did not prepare me for. And, I have learned that sometimes the right thing to do and the legal thing to do are not the same thing." He leaned forward in his chair. "I am not going to punish you for saving a child's life. I am not going to write this up or report it to anyone. As far as the official record is concerned, you were here at the base the whole time, dealing with a bad case of food poisoning that kept you in your quarters." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, tears of exhaustion and relief and something else she could not name. "Thank you, sir." "Do not thank me," Whitmore said. "Just keep doing what you are doing. And try not to get yourself killed in the process." The news of Sarah's storm journey spread beyond the villages around Nasirabad. It spread to other parts of the province, carried by travelers and traders who heard the story and passed it on. It spread to other military units, mentioned in casual conversations between soldiers who had heard about the crazy nurse at FOB Kestrel who seemed to think Afghan lives were worth risking her own for.
And, eventually, it spread to a classified briefing room where men in unmarked uniforms were discussing an entirely different problem.
Captain Marcus Cole was the kind of soldier who did not officially exist.
His name did not appear on any unit roster. His missions did not get written up in after-action reports.
He worked in the shadows where the rules of conventional warfare did not apply, where success was measured in objectives achieved and failures were buried in classified files that no one would ever read. He was 38 years old, with a face that looked older because of the sun and the stress and the things he had seen. He had been in special operations for 15 years, commanding small teams of elite warriors on missions that ranged from hostage rescue to targeted elimination. He had saved countless lives and taken many others, and he had made peace with both aspects of his work. But his current mission was something new, something that pushed the boundaries of what he had been trained to do. And it was this mission that brought the name of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell to his attention. The briefing was being conducted by a CIA analyst named Patterson, a man in his 50s who had spent his career studying the tribal dynamics of Afghanistan. Patterson was explaining a problem that had been growing worse for months, a network of villages in a remote province that were being squeezed between Taliban insurgents and government corruption, leaving them with nowhere to turn for help. The villagers do not trust the government because they have been robbed and abused by officials who are supposed to protect them, Patterson said. They do not trust the Taliban because the Taliban kills anyone who does not follow their rules exactly. And they do not trust us because we have made promises before and not kept them. So what do they trust? Cole asked.
Patterson pulled up a satellite image on the screen.
They trust each other. They trust their traditions. And, increasingly, they trust a few individuals who have proven themselves through actions rather than words. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a grainy photograph of a woman in military uniform standing in a village square. She was surrounded by local women and children, and she appeared to be demonstrating something with her hands.
This is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Army Nurse Corps, currently assigned to FOB Kestrel.
Over the past 6 months, she has been conducting unauthorized medical missions to villages in the area. She has treated hundreds of patients, trained local women as first aid providers, and built a network of trust that extends across multiple tribal boundaries. Cole studied the photograph.
The woman did not look like much.
Average height, average build, the kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after meeting her. But something in her posture suggested a strength that the camera could not fully capture. "Why is she not in a military prison?" one of the other men in the room asked.
Unauthorized contact with local populations is a serious violation.
Her commanding officer has been covering for her, Patterson explained.
Colonel James Whitmore. He appears to believe that what she is doing is worth the risk.
Cole leaned forward.
What exactly has she accomplished?
Patterson clicked through several more slides, each showing data points and maps. The villages where she operates have seen a 60% decrease in Taliban activity.
Local support for insurgent groups has dropped significantly. Intelligence tip-offs have increased.
And, perhaps most importantly, the villagers have started cooperating with each other across tribal lines in ways they never have before.
All because of one nurse? Not just any nurse.
She is not just treating injuries and diseases. She is teaching people to take care of themselves. She is empowering women who have never had power before. She is creating bonds between communities that have been enemies for generations. Patterson paused. She is doing exactly what we have been trying to do for 20 years, and she is succeeding where we have failed.
Cole understood where this was going. You want us to use her.
I want you to help her, Patterson corrected. Lieutenant Mitchell has been operating without support, without resources, without any official backing.
She has been surviving on donations and goodwill and sheer determination.
But she is reaching the limits of what one person can do alone. He clicked to a final slide, which showed a map of the region with dozens of villages marked in different colors.
This is her current network. Green villages are ones she visits regularly.
Yellow are ones that have requested her help but she cannot reach. Red are ones that are currently under Taliban control but have made secret contact asking for medical assistance.
Cole studied the map. It was impressive. The woman had built something real, something that could be scaled up if properly supported. But he also saw the vulnerabilities. She was exposed. Unprotected. A single lucky Taliban commander could identify her pattern and set a trap.
She would be dead before anyone knew she was in danger.
"What do you want from us specifically?" he asked. Patterson looked around the room at the assembled special operations officers. "I want you to protect her.
Not by surrounding her with soldiers who will destroy everything she has built, but by operating in the shadows around her, eliminating threats she does not even know exist.
I want you to give her the security to keep doing what she does best. And if the threats become too big to handle quietly?" Patterson's expression was grim.
"Then, we extract her and hope that what she has built can survive without her. But that is the last resort. If we can keep her in place, keep her operating, she could be more valuable than 100 military operations." Cole made his decision.
"I want to meet her first.
Before I commit my team to anything, I need to see what she is really doing out there."
"That can be arranged," Patterson said. "But she cannot know who you are or why you are there."
"If she finds out she is being watched, it could change everything."
Cole nodded. He was used to operating in disguise, pretending to be something he was not. It was one of the essential skills of his profession.
2 weeks later, he arrived at FOB Kestrel as a logistics contractor, part of a team that was supposedly evaluating supply chain efficiency at remote bases. It was a cover that gave him freedom to move around and ask questions without raising suspicion. His first impression of the base was negative. The morale was low, the facilities were shabby, and the soldiers seemed to be going through the motions without any real sense of purpose. It was exactly the kind of place where incompetent officers dumped people they did not want and forgot about them. He asked casual questions about the base personnel, pretending to be interested in how different departments functioned. Everyone he talked to mentioned the base nurse eventually, usually in the context of a joke about how useless she was. "She spends all her time doing inventory reports and handing out band-aids," one sergeant told him.
"Waste of a deployment slot if you ask me."
"I heard she goes on patrols sometimes," Cole said, testing the waters.
The sergeant shrugged. "Yeah, she rides along sometimes. Probably bored out of her mind like the rest of us. Nothing ever happens out here anyway." Cole noted the casual dismissal and filed it away.
If Sarah Mitchell was operating a secret humanitarian network, she was doing an excellent job of hiding it from her colleagues. He arranged to join one of the Saturday patrols, claiming he needed to see how supplies were being delivered to forward positions. No one questioned his request, and the next morning he found himself climbing into a Humvee alongside Lieutenant Mitchell and a squad of soldiers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Up close, Sarah was even less impressive than her photograph had suggested. She was quiet, almost mousy, keeping to herself while the soldiers joked and complained. She carried a backpack that seemed too large for her frame, and she stared out the window with an expression that could have been interpreted as boredom or melancholy. But Cole was trained to see what others missed. He noticed how her eyes tracked the terrain, identifying landmarks and measuring distances. He noticed how she subtly checked her watch at regular intervals, as if mentally counting down to something. And he noticed how her body language changed as they approached the village of Nasirabad, shifting from passive to alert, like a predator sensing its territory. The transformation when they arrived was remarkable. The moment Sarah stepped out of the Humvee, she was no longer the invisible base nurse. She was someone else entirely, someone who moved with purpose and greeted the villagers with warmth that seemed completely genuine. Cole watched from a distance as she set up her clinic in the converted shop. He saw the long line of patients waiting for her attention. He saw the women she had trained assisting her with efficiency that spoke of months of practice. He saw children running up to her with gifts of flowers and drawings, their faces bright with adoration. And he saw something else, something that made him revise every assumption he had made about this mission.
He saw Hamid, the old teacher, treating Sarah not as a helper or a patron but as a partner. An equal. He saw village elders approaching her with questions about problems that had nothing to do with medicine, disputes about water rights and grazing land, and family feuds that had been festering for generations. He saw her listening to each one with focused attention, offering suggestions that the elders received with respect. She was not just providing medical care. She was building something. A community. A network of trust that crossed boundaries of tribe and village and tradition. She was doing with kindness and patience what the military had been trying to do with guns and money for 20 years. Cole stayed in the background throughout the visit, asking occasional questions about local conditions and pretending to take notes about supply challenges. But his real attention was on Sarah, watching how she moved, how she spoke, how she handled the endless stream of needs that came her way. When it was time to leave, he saw her exchange a few final words with Hamid. The old man's face was serious, and Sarah's expression showed concern about whatever he was telling her. Cole could not hear their conversation, but he filed the observation away for later analysis. On the ride back to the base, he made a point of sitting near Sarah. "That was impressive," he said. "The clinic you run out there." She looked at him with a hint of suspicion that told him she was more aware of her surroundings than she let on. "It is just basic healthcare. Nothing special." The villagers seemed to disagree. "They treat you like a hero." Sarah's expression closed off slightly. "They are grateful for help." "That does not make anyone a hero." Cole recognized the deflection. She was protecting herself, hiding the truth of what she was doing from a stranger who might be a threat. He could not blame her. In her position, he would do the same. "Well, you are making a difference out here," he said. "More than most of us can claim." She studied his face for a moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Then, she nodded politely and turned back to the window, ending the conversation. That night, Cole sent an encrypted message to Patterson with his preliminary assessment. The subject was everything the intelligence analyst had claimed and more. Her work was having real impact. Her network was expanding. And she was vulnerable in ways that demanded immediate attention. He also added a personal observation that surprised him as he typed it. She was not just doing a job. She genuinely cared about these people. And that caring made her dangerous, not just to the Taliban, but to anyone who tried to use her for purposes she did not share. Cole decided to extend his cover mission at FOB Kestrel. He needed to learn more about Sarah Mitchell before he could figure out how to help her without destroying what she had built. He did not know that his decision would lead him into a partnership that would change both their lives. He did not know that the threats gathering around Sarah were far more serious than anyone realized. And he did not know that in a few short months, he would be sending an Apache helicopter to a remote base to find a nurse that the world had laughed at, because she would be the only person who could save his men. But all of that was still to come. For now, he was just an observer, watching from the shadows, beginning to understand why a simple base nurse had become one of the most valuable assets in the entire Afghan theater of operations. The weeks that followed were an education for Marcus Cole. He extended his cover assignment again and again, always finding new reasons why the logistics evaluation required more time. In reality, he was mapping Sarah's network, identifying the threats she faced, and laying groundwork for the protection mission that Patterson had proposed. He joined more patrols to Nasirabad and the surrounding villages, always staying in the background but watching everything. He saw Sarah handle medical emergencies with calm competence. He saw her navigate complex social situations with an intuition that no training manual could provide. He saw her make mistakes and learn from them, adjusting her approach based on what worked and what did not. He also saw the cracks in her armor. The exhaustion she tried to hide when she thought no one was looking. The frustration when supplies ran out or when patients came to her with problems she could not solve. The loneliness of someone who had built deep connections with people she could not truly be part of, while remaining isolated from her own colleagues back at the base. The other soldiers at FOB Kestrel continued to dismiss and mock her, completely unaware of what she was doing. Cole found their blindness almost painful to watch. They saw only what they expected to see, a quiet nurse who kept to herself and did not seem to matter. They had no idea they were sharing a base with someone who was accomplishing more than all of them combined. One evening, Cole was in the mess hall when he overheard a particularly vicious round of gossip about Sarah. A group of junior officers were competing to see who could come up with the most creative insults about the base nurse, their laughter loud enough to carry across the building. Sarah was not present, but Cole felt anger rising in his chest anyway. These men were enjoying the comfort and relative safety of FOB Kestrel while she was out risking her life for people they did not care about. They had done nothing of value during their deployment, while she had built something that might actually make a lasting difference. He considered confronting them but decided against it. His cover required him to remain neutral, uninvolved in base politics. And, besides, he suspected Sarah would not want him to fight her battles. She had survived this treatment for over a year. She had learned to let it roll off her, at least on the surface. But he made a mental note of each face, each name. If his mission progressed as planned, there might come a day when these soldiers would learn exactly how wrong they had been about the nurse they had mocked. The threat assessment Cole was conducting revealed several concerning patterns. Taliban activity in the area had decreased since Sarah started her work, but that did not mean the insurgents had lost interest. If anything, intelligence suggested they were studying her, trying to understand why the villages under her influence had become so much less receptive to their recruitment efforts. There had also been suspicious incidents that might have been reconnaissance. Unknown men appearing in villages and asking questions about the American nurse. Vehicles watching the patrol routes but not engaging. The kind of preparation that preceded targeted operations. Cole sent detailed reports to Patterson, recommending specific protective measures. He wanted surveillance assets positioned along the routes Sarah traveled. He wanted quick reaction forces staged at locations where they could respond within minutes if something went wrong. He wanted eyes on every village in her network, watching for the early signs of trouble. Patterson approved most of the requests but warned that resources were limited. Special operations teams were stretched thin across the country, and Sarah's mission, however valuable, was not the only priority. Cole would have to make do with what he could get. He started building his own network of contacts in the area, people who could serve as early warning systems if threats were developing. Some were military, soldiers at other bases who owed him favors or who had been read into the operation at a high level. Others were local, Afghans like Tariq who had proven their loyalty and who had their own reasons for wanting Sarah's work to continue. Through this network, Cole learned that Hamid's conversations with Sarah had been about exactly what he suspected. The old teacher was worried. He had heard rumors of Taliban interest in the American nurse. He had received indirect warnings from contacts in the insurgency that suggested something might be planned. He did not know specifics, but his instincts told him that danger was approaching. Cole arranged to meet Hamid privately, presenting himself as a friend of Sarah's who shared the teacher's concerns. The old man was suspicious at first, but Cole convinced him by demonstrating knowledge that only someone with access to classified information could have. "She does not know she is in danger," Hamid said. "I have tried to tell her, but she does not believe the Taliban would bother with a nurse." "She underestimates her own importance," Cole agreed. "What she is doing here threatens everything they are trying to accomplish. That makes her a target." Hamid nodded gravely. "What will you do?" "I will protect her," Cole said. "But I need your help. I need you to be my eyes and ears in the villages. I need you to tell me immediately if you see or hear anything suspicious." The old teacher agreed, understanding that this strange American might be the difference between Sarah living and dying. Cole returned to his role as a background observer, continuing to gather information while the pieces of his protection plan fell into place. He knew that eventually he would have to reveal himself to Sarah, would have to explain who he was and why he was there. But that conversation would change everything, and he wanted to wait until absolutely necessary. He did not know that the waiting was almost over. He did not know that the threats he had been tracking were about to accelerate in ways no one had predicted. And he did not know that the skills of a combat nurse would soon be put to a test that would reveal the true measure of her character.
The storm was coming. And, when it arrived, everyone would finally understand why the base nurse they had laughed at was worth more than all of them combined. The message came on a Thursday morning, delivered by a boy who ran the 5 kilometers from his village without stopping. He was maybe 12 years old, barefoot and breathless, and he collapsed in the dust outside the medical station at FOB Kestrel before Sarah could even get a glass of water to him. His village was called Panjway, one of the yellow-marked locations on the map that Patterson had shown in his classified briefing. It was a place Sarah had wanted to reach but never could, too far from the patrol routes and too dangerous to approach without military escort. Now Panjway was reaching out to her. The boy's message was simple but devastating. There had been an explosion. Many people were hurt. The village had no doctors, no medicine, no one who knew what to do. They had heard about the American nurse who helped people, and they were begging her to come. Sarah's first instinct was to grab her bag and go immediately, but she forced herself to think. Panjway was outside her normal area of operation. It was not on any patrol route she could join. Getting there would require either walking through dangerous territory or convincing someone with authority to provide transportation. She went to Colonel Whitmore with the request, knowing it would probably be denied. The colonel listened to her explanation with a face that grew more troubled with each word. "Lieutenant, Panjway is in hostile territory. We have not had a patrol through there in months because the Taliban presence is too strong. I cannot authorize a mission just to provide medical care. People are dying, sir. Children, probably. Civilians who have done nothing wrong except live in the wrong place." Whitmore ran a hand over his face. "I understand. Believe me, I do. But the risk is too high. If something happened to you out there, I would never forgive myself. And I would probably face a court-martial for sending you." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. The military operated on rules and regulations, and those rules did not account for dying villagers who needed help that only she could provide. She left the command building feeling sick with helplessness. The boy from Panjway was waiting for her outside the medical station, his eyes full of hope that she would have good news. She did not know how to tell him that no one was coming. But someone else had been listening to her conversation with the colonel. Marcus Cole had positioned himself where he could hear without being seen, a habit from years of covert operations. He had known the moment the messenger arrived that something significant was happening, and now he understood the situation completely. He found Sarah alone in her medical station, staring at her bag of supplies like she was trying to will herself to pick it up and walk to Panjway anyway. The boy was sitting in the waiting area, accepting the water and food she had given him but clearly not understanding why the nurse was not leaving with him. "There might be a way," Cole said from the doorway. Sarah looked up at him, not bothering to hide her suspicion. "Who are you, really?" "Because you are not a logistics contractor. I have known that since the first time you joined one of our patrols." Cole considered lying but decided against it. The situation had moved past the point where his cover mattered. "My name is Captain Marcus Cole. I work for a unit that does not officially exist. I have been watching you for several weeks because my superiors believe what you are doing here is important enough to protect." "Protect?" "The Taliban knows about you, Lieutenant. They have been studying your movements, trying to understand why their influence is weakening in the villages you visit. Eventually, they are going to decide you are too dangerous to leave alone." Sarah absorbed this information with less surprise than Cole expected. "I have suspected something like that. Hamid warned me there were rumors. Hamid is one of my contacts now. He has been helping me keep you safe without your knowledge. So everyone has been lying to me." Cole shook his head. "Everyone has been trying to help you continue your work without the knowledge that you were in danger. We believed you would do exactly what you are doing now if you learned about the threats. You would accept the risk and keep going." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You said there might be a way to get to Panjway. What did you mean?" "I have access to resources the colonel does not know about. Helicopters, ground teams, the kind of support that does not appear in official records.
If you are willing to trust me, I can get you to that village. Why would you do that? If protecting me is your mission, taking me into hostile territory seems like the opposite of protection. Cole had asked himself the same question during the brief walk from his listening post to the medical station. The logical answer was that he should keep her safe at the base, wait for the crisis to pass, and maintain the status quo. But something had changed in him during the weeks he had spent watching her work. He had come to respect her in a way he rarely respected anyone. Because you are right, he said. People are dying out there. And you are the only person who can help them. That matters more than keeping you wrapped in cotton where nothing can touch you. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, and Cole had the same uncomfortable feeling from their first conversation. She was seeing things he preferred to keep hidden. When can we leave? She asked. They departed 2 hours later, after Cole made contact with his team and arranged for extraction and backup. The plan was risky but workable. A helicopter would drop them near Panjwai, close enough to walk but far enough to avoid drawing attention. Cole's team would provide overwatch from concealed positions, ready to intervene if the Taliban appeared. Another helicopter would extract them at a predetermined time, with contingency plans if things went wrong. Sarah did not tell Colonel Whitmore she was leaving. She did not tell anyone except the few people Cole had designated as need to know. She simply walked away from FOB Kestrel and did not look back. The helicopter was a civilian model, deliberately chosen to avoid attracting military attention. Cole flew as co-pilot while Sarah and the messenger boy sat in the back, watching the landscape scroll past below them. The boy's eyes were huge with wonder. He had never been in any kind of aircraft before. They landed in a rocky valley about 3 kilometers from Panjwai, and the helicopter lifted off immediately to avoid being spotted. Cole led the way on foot, moving with the casual confidence of someone who had walked through hostile territory countless times before. Sarah followed close behind, her medical bag heavy on her back but her steps steady. The approach to the village took 40 minutes, and Sarah used the time to prepare herself mentally for what she was about to face. Mass casualty events were different from the one-on-one care she had been providing in Nasirabad. They required triage, the brutal process of deciding who could be saved and who could not. They required efficiency over compassion, speed over thoroughness. They required her to become something harder than she liked to be. The village appeared around a bend in the path, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The explosion had been in the center of town, probably a car bomb or some kind of improvised explosive device. Several buildings had collapsed entirely, and others were damaged so badly that they might fall at any moment. People were moving through the debris, calling out names, pulling at rubble with their bare hands. Sarah pushed past Cole and ran toward the chaos. The scene was worse than anything she had experienced in Iraq. Bodies were scattered across the open area where the bomb had detonated. Some were obviously dead, torn apart by the blast. Others were alive but gravely injured, bleeding from wounds that would kill them without immediate care. Children were crying. Women were wailing. Men were standing helpless, not knowing what to do. Sarah found a spot near the village well where she could set up her triage station. She pulled her bag off her back and began laying out supplies, her hands moving with automatic precision while her eyes scanned the casualties around her. "Everyone who can walk, bring the injured to me here," she shouted. "Start with the children and anyone who was bleeding badly." The villagers stared at her for a moment, confused by this foreign woman who had appeared out of nowhere and started giving orders. But the authority in her voice cut through their shock, and they began to respond. The first hour was a nightmare of blood and screaming and desperate measures. Sarah treated 17 patients in rapid succession, assessing each one in seconds and making the hard decisions about who could be saved with the resources available. She set bones, closed wounds, treated burns, and administered the precious medications she had brought. She talked constantly, giving instructions to the villagers who served as her impromptu assistants, explaining what she was doing so they could help. Cole watched from a position at the edge of the village, his weapon ready and his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding hills. His team had reported no enemy activity, but he knew that could change at any moment. An explosion this size would attract attention.
The Taliban would want to know what had happened and who was responsible. He was also watching Sarah, and what he saw amazed him. She had transformed completely from the quiet woman he had observed at FOB Kestrel. Here, in the middle of chaos and suffering, she was a force of nature. She moved with purpose and certainty. She made decisions instantly and never second-guessed herself. She treated each patient with efficiency that did not sacrifice humanity, finding moments to offer comfort even when time was desperately short. By the second hour, the immediate crisis had stabilized. The most critical patients had been treated or identified as beyond help. Sarah was now working through the less severe cases, cleaning wounds and setting minor fractures, her bag of supplies steadily emptying. She was treating a young woman with cuts on her face when Cole appeared at her shoulder.
"We have a problem." Sarah did not stop working. "What kind of problem?" Scouts spotted a convoy approaching from the east.
At least 6 vehicles. They are flying Taliban flags. Sarah finished bandaging her patient's wounds and turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but he could see the fear in her eyes.
"How long do we have?"
20 minutes, maybe less. The extraction helicopter cannot get here in time.
"We need to move now."
Sarah looked around at the patients she had been treating, the villagers who had placed their trust in her.
"I cannot leave them. The Taliban will punish them for accepting help from Americans.
If you stay, they will kill you. And then, they will punish the villagers anyway. Then, we need to hide them too."
"Everyone who was involved in helping me."
Cole wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. She was not going to abandon these people, and he was not going to abandon her. Which meant they needed a new plan. "There are caves in the hills to the north," said a voice. Sarah turned to see an elderly man, one of the village leaders who had been helping organize the casualty response.
"We used them during the Soviet War. They can hold many people. Can you get everyone there in 20 minutes?
The old man looked at his wounded community and shook his head.
"Not everyone. The badly injured cannot be moved quickly.
But the women and children, the ones who helped you, they can go."
Sarah made a decision.
"Then, go.
Get everyone you can to safety."
"I will stay with the patients who cannot be moved."
Cole grabbed her arm. "That is suicide."
"Maybe.
But those people cannot be left alone. If I hide, the Taliban will torture them to find out where I went.
If I stay, at least they might leave the villagers alone." "They will not leave the villagers alone.
They will make an example of everyone."
"Then, staying gives me a chance to negotiate.
To offer myself in exchange for their lives."
Cole stared at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was not being naive. She knew exactly what she was risking. She just believed it was the right thing to do.
"I am not leaving you," he said. "You have a team to lead.
You have responsibilities that go beyond me.
My responsibility right now is keeping you alive. My team can handle themselves."
They did not have time to argue further. The village erupted into controlled chaos as the able-bodied began helping the elderly and the wounded toward the caves in the hills. Sarah turned back to her patients, the ones too injured to move, and began preparing them for what was coming. There were 7 of them. An old man with internal bleeding that she could not stop. A young mother with burns covering half her body. A teenage boy whose legs had been crushed by falling debris. 4 others in various states of broken and bleeding. They were all going to die, probably, and Sarah's presence would not change that. But she could not bring herself to leave them alone. Cole took up a position near the village entrance, where he could see the road the Taliban convoy would use. He had called for backup, but the nearest support was 20 minutes out. Plenty of time for things to go very wrong.
The convoy appeared on the horizon, growing larger as it approached.
6 vehicles, as the scouts had reported.
Probably 20 to 30 fighters. More than enough to overwhelm one operator with a rifle, no matter how good he was. Cole considered his options.
He could engage at long range, slow them down, buy time for the extraction helicopter to arrive. But that would draw attention to his position and guarantee a firefight. Or he could stay hidden, let them enter the village, and hope for an opportunity to protect Sarah without starting a battle he could not win. He chose the second option, fading into the ruins of a building where he could observe without being seen. The convoy rolled into Panjway with horns blaring, the fighters hanging out of windows and shouting triumphantly. They expected no resistance. This was their territory, and the explosion that had devastated the village was probably their doing in the first place, punishment for some real or imagined slight against their authority. The commander stepped out of the lead vehicle, a tall man with a black beard and the cold eyes of someone who had killed many times and felt nothing. He surveyed the destruction with satisfaction, then spotted Sarah kneeling among her patients near the well. His expression shifted from triumph to surprise to something else.
Recognition, maybe.
He had probably seen photographs of her, intelligence gathered by his network of informants.
He knew exactly who she was.
The American nurse, he said in accented English.
We have heard stories about you.
The woman who thinks she can save these worthless villagers from their fate. Sarah stood slowly, keeping her hands visible.
I am just a nurse. I came to help the wounded.
You came to interfere with God's work. These people were punished for their sins. You have no right to undo that punishment.
There are no sins here.
Only wounded people who need care. The commander walked closer, and Cole's finger tightened on his trigger.
One shot, and the leader would be dead.
But then, the other fighters would open fire, and Sarah would die in the crossfire. He forced himself to wait.
You are brave, the commander said. I will give you that.
Your people would have abandoned these animals to their fate.
But you stayed.
Why?
Because they are not animals. They are human beings.
The commander laughed, but there was no humor in it. Human beings who have betrayed their own people by accepting help from foreign invaders. They deserve what is coming to them.
Then, punish me instead. I am the foreigner. I am the invader.
Let the villagers go and take me.
Cole's blood ran cold. She was actually offering herself as a sacrifice.
And, from the way the commander was,